On a rainy Tuesday, at the Hungry Ghost coffee shop in Brooklyn, Audrey Reynolds spilled a scorching oat milk latte onto a customer's $7,000 bespoke suit. She braced for a lawsuit. Instead, the man-billionaire hedge fund recluse Casper Laurent froze. For 500 years, Casper had ruled an empire of ash and shadows, searching the globe for the singular soul bound to his own. He didn't find her in a royal palace or an ancient tomb. He found her scraping by on minimum wage. The humidity inside the Hungry Ghost coffee shop on Fulton Street was suffocating. Outside, a relentless late autumn rain beat against the heavy glass panes, blurring the yellow headlights of New York City, yellow cabs crawling toward the Manhattan Bridge. Audrey Reynolds wiped down the espresso machine for the fourth time in an hour, her wrists aching from a double shift that had started at 5 in the morning. Her apron was stained with oat milk and dark roast syrup, and her hair was pinned up with a cheap plastic claw clip. At 24, Audrey's life was measured not in dreams, but in dollars and cents. Specifically, the $242,000 medical debt currently sitting on the ledger at New York Presbyterian Hospital, accrued by her younger brother Leo, who was fighting a severe, undiagnosed hematological failure. The doctors called it idiopathic anemia. Audrey called it a slow death sentence they couldn't afford. "Audrey, stop spacing out," barked Gavin Fletcher, the shift manager, his voice cutting through the hiss of the steam wand. "We've got a VIP line forming because the subway collapsed on the A line. Get the register." Audrey swallowed her exhaustion, offering a practiced, hollow smile to the next customer. But as she opened her mouth to speak, the ambient noise of the cafe, the clinking of ceramic mugs, the low murmur of conversation, the roar of the rain suddenly died away. It wasn't a gradual silence. It was a sudden, violent drop in atmospheric pressure, the kind that happens right before a lightning strike. The air grew icy cold, freezing the breath in her throat. The heavy wooden door swung open, and a man stepped inside. He didn't look like Brooklyn. He wore a charcoal-gray, double-breasted overcoat, tailored so perfectly it could only have come from Savile Row. His dark hair was damp from the rain pushed back from a face defined by sharp, aristocratic angles, and skin so pale it looked like carved marble under the harsh fluorescent lights. But it was his eyes that arrested her, an intense, piercing shade of amber that seemed entirely unnatural. As he walked toward the counter, the other patrons subconsciously stepped aside, clearing a path without even realizing why they were doing it. Every instinct in Audrey's body screamed at her to look away, to hide behind the espresso machine, but she was paralyzed. "Welcome to Hungry Ghost," she whispered, her voice cracking. "What can I get started for you?" The man didn't look at the menu. He looked directly at her. The moment his amber eyes locked onto hers, his entire posture stiffened, his pupils dilated so completely that the amber rim almost vanished. He drew a sharp, ragged breath, his chest expanding as if he were inhaling an intoxicating scent. "It is you," he murmured. The voice was low, rich, carrying a faint, untraceable European accent, something old, heavy, and forgotten. "Sir," Audrey blinked, confusion piercing through her fear. "An espresso, black," he said quickly, masterfully pulling a mask of polished indifference back over his features. Audrey nodded nervously, turning to pull the shot. Her hands were shaking so violently that the portafilter slipped. When she reached for the paper cup to pour the steamed oat milk for the adjacent order, her elbow caught the edge of a freshly brewed 16-ounce Americano. The scalding liquid tipped over the counter, cascading directly down the front of the man's pristine gray suit. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry," Audrey gasped, grabbing a handful of cheap brown napkins and leaping across the counter. "I'm so sorry, I completely lost my grip." She instinctively pressed the napkins against his chest, trying to soak up the liquid. But the moment her bare fingers brushed against his hand, a literal shockwave tore through them. A blinding spark of static electricity snapped between their skin. Audrey pulled back with a yelp, but Casper didn't flinch from the burn of the coffee. Instead, he caught her wrist. His grip was like an iron vice, yet incredibly gentle. His skin wasn't just cold, it felt like solid ice. "Don't," Casper whispered, his eyes blazing with an emotion so raw, so agonizingly deep that Audrey felt her breath leave her body. "Do not apologize to me, not after 500 years. Let go of me," she whispered, a sudden spike of real-world terror replacing her shock. "Sir, you're hurting me. I'll call security." Gavin Fletcher stepped forward, his hand hovering near the landline telephone beneath the counter. "Hey, buddy, take your hands off my employee right now." or I'm calling the NYPD. Casper slowly released her wrist, his gaze never leaving Audrey's face. He looked down at his ruined suit, then back up at her trembling form. Without a word, he reached into his breast pocket and pulled out a heavy, ornate object. He placed it quietly on the counter over the spilled coffee. Then he turned and walked out into the torrential rain, vanishing into the Brooklyn crowd before the door could even swing shut. Gavin exhaled a breath he seemed to have been holding. What a psycho. Are you okay, Audrey? Audrey didn't answer. Her eyes were locked on the object he had left behind. It wasn't a stack of $100 bills. It was a massive, solid gold coin, its edges worn smooth by centuries of friction. Stamped on the front was the unmistakable profile of an emperor from the 1500s, surrounded by Latin inscriptions. But it wasn't the gold that made Audrey's heart stop. It was the custom engraving crudely scratched into the back of the coin, a very specific geometric crest of an open eye surrounded by 3 thorny roses. It was the exact same crest tattooed on the inside of her late mother's wrist, a woman who had died in a psychiatric facility 10 years ago, babbling about a king who ruled the night. By 3 in the afternoon, Audrey was standing inside the secure, bulletproof glass vestibule of Goldstein and Sons Antiquities on 47th Street, the heart of Manhattan's Diamond District. She had taken the subway straight from her shift, the gold coin burning a hole through the pocket of her cheap denim jacket. Harvey Goldstein, a third-generation numismatist with thick spectacles and a permanent scowl, peered through his loupe at the coin resting on the black velvet pad between them. The silence stretched for 3 agonizing minutes. "Where did you get this, young lady?" Harvey asked, his voice suddenly losing its sharp New York edge, replaced by a quiet, reverent awe. "A customer left it as a tip," Audrey lied, her heart pounding against her ribs. "Is it real?" "Real," Harvey let out a dry, breathy laugh. "This is a flawless Dutch ducat, minted in 1526 during the reign of Emperor Charles V. But it's not just a standard issue. Look at the purity of the gold. It's unrefined by standard 16th century methods. It's purer than anything the royal mints were producing at the time. And this engraving on the back." He traced the eye and the 3 thorny roses. "This isn't a modern addition. The oxidation within the grooves matches the age of the coin perfectly." "What is it worth?" Audrey asked, her mind instantly flashing to Leo's medical bills. "To a museum, $100,000, Harvey said flatly. "To a private collector who understands the specific occult provenance of this crest, you could name your price. Millions, perhaps. But there's a problem." Audrey leaned in. "What problem?" "The man who owns the largest private collection of these specific regional artifacts is currently sitting in a penthouse office on Park Avenue," Harvey said, looking up at her with genuine worry. "His name is Casper Laurent. He runs Laurent Capital Group. And let me tell you something, kid, people don't just leave his personal estate assets as a tip at a coffee shop. If you stole this, return it. The Laurent family doesn't use lawyers to settle debts. They destroy people." The blood drained from Audrey's face. Casper Laurent. An hour later, Audrey stood in the soaring white marble lobby of the Laurent Capital Group skyscraper on Park Avenue. The security grid was tighter than an airport. Double turnstiles, biometric scanners, and heavily armed guards from Vanguard Security Solutions, a private defense contractor, stood watch at every exit. "I need to see Casper Laurent," Audrey told the receptionist, a sleek woman named Meredith Croft, who looked like she had been genetically engineered for corporate dominance. Meredith didn't even look up from her dual-screen monitor. "Mr. Laurent does not accept unscheduled visitors. You can speak with his public relations liaison by filing a request on our website." Audrey reached into her pocket, pulled out the gold ducat, and slammed it onto the marble desk. The heavy ring of solid gold echoed through the pristine lobby. "Tell him Audrey Reynolds is here. Tell him I want to know why he has my mother's crest." Meredith looked at the coin, her professional facade instantly cracking. She picked up a sleek black telephone, whispered a few words, and looked back at Audrey with an expression that was a mixture of fear and profound curiosity. 55th floor, Meredith said, her voice shaking slightly. "The private elevator is open for you." The ride up to the 55th floor took less than 20 seconds, but to Audrey, it felt like a descent into another world. When the doors slid open, she stepped directly into a cavernous penthouse office that looked like a cross between a modern museum and an ancient library. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Central Park, but the glass was heavily tinted, blocking out almost all natural light despite the afternoon hour. Deep shadows clung to the corners of the room, Casper Laurent stood by the window, his back to her. He had changed into a fresh suit this one, an obsidian black wool blend. "You should not have come here, Audrey," Casper said softly, without turning around. "Who are you?" Audrey demanded, her voice echoing off the concrete pillars. "How do you know my name? Why did you track me down at a coffee shop? And why do you have the exact same symbol that my mother drew on the walls of her hospital room before she died?" Casper slowly turned to face her. In the dim light of the office, his skin looked almost translucent. "I did not track you down. I have spent 5 centuries searching for you. Every lifetime your soul returns in a different vessel with a different name, a different face. In 1526, your name was Amalia. You were the daughter of a printer in Amsterdam. In 1789, you were a seamstress in Paris named Vivienne, and every time before I can save you, the world tears you away from me." Audrey took a step backward, her hand dropping to her phone in her pocket. "You're insane. You're a crazy billionaire with a stalking fixation. I'm leaving." "Are you?" Casper moved. Audrey didn't even see him step forward. 1 millisecond, he was 20 feet away by the window. The next, he was standing directly in front of her, the wind of his sudden movement ruffling her bangs. It was physically impossible. No human being could move that fast. Audrey gasped, freezing in terror. "Look at me, Audrey," Casper commanded, gently, his voice vibrating with a terrifying intensity. "Look at my eyes. Tell me your blood doesn't recognize what I am." Before she could speak, his desk phone flashed red. A sharp, synthesized voice cut through the tension. "Mr. Laurent, we have a breach at New York Presbyterian. The asset has been compromised." Casper's face transformed, the aristocratic composure shattered, replaced by a terrifying predatory snarl. His upper lip curled back, and to Audrey's absolute horror, 2 elongated, razor-sharp fangs slid down from his gums, glistening in the dim light. What did you say about the hospital?" Audrey stammered, her voice dropping to a terrified whisper as she stared at his monstrous jaw. "What about Leo?" Casper looked at her, his expression suddenly torn by a deep, ancient grief. "The Sovereign Assembly. They found you through him. They know you've returned." "What are you talking about? What is the Sovereign Assembly?" Audrey screamed, backing away until her spine hit the cold glass of the elevator doors. Her mind was shattering. She was looking at a monster, a literal vampire, standing in a multi-billion-dollar corporate office on Park Avenue. Casper retracted his fangs with a visible effort, his features smoothing back into human symmetry, though his eyes remained a dangerous, glowing amber. "The Sovereign Assembly is the shadow board that controls global pharmaceutical distribution, high-frequency trading markets, and human livestock management. They are the elders of my kind. For 500 years, I have fought them for control of the global supply chain to keep our existence hidden. But my rival, Garrick Mercer, has been watching me. He knew I was looking for you." "My brother is a human being. He's sick," Audrey cried, pressing the elevator button frantically. "He isn't sick, Audrey," Casper said, stepping closer, his hands raised in a gesture of peace. "Leo doesn't have anemia. His blood is rejecting the latent ancestral markers of your lineage. Your bloodline carries a genetic anomaly, what my kind calls the primer anima. Every 500 years, the soul of the first bride is reborn. Her blood contains the exact enzyme sequence required to synthesize absolute daylight immunity for a vampire. If Garrick Mercer gets his hands on you, or your brother's matching genetic material, he will harvest you like a crop." Audrey's phone suddenly buzzed violently in her hand. It was an automated alert from New York Presbyterian's patient care portal. "Alert, patient Leo Reynolds has been discharged against medical advice. Security clearance code Mercer 992. "No, no, no." Audrey's voice broke into a sob. She dialed Leo's cell phone, but it went straight to voicemail. She dialed the nurse's station, but the line just rang indefinitely. "What did they do to him? Where is he?" "Mercer's private security contractor's Vanguard took him," Casper said, his voice dropping into a dark, resonant register that promised violence. "They are likely taking him to Mercer's private research facility in the Hudson Valley, a black site masked as an agricultural testing laboratory." Audrey looked at Casper. He was a monster, a creature out of nightmares. But as she looked into his amber eyes, a strange, terrifying sense of familiarity washed over her. It was a phantom memory, the smell of burning wood, the sound of ancient languages, the feeling of this exact man holding her close while a castle burned around them. Her mother hadn't been insane. Her mother had been remembering. "Why should I trust you?" Audrey whispered, tears streaming down her face. "You want my blood too." Casper took a step forward. Dropping to one knee before her on the cold marble floor, he took her trembling hand, pressing it against his chest. Beneath the expensive fabric of his suit, Audrey felt nothing. No heartbeat, no warmth, only a profound, steady stillness. In 1526, when the plague struck Amsterdam, I offered to turn you to save your life, Caspar said, his voice cracking with emotion. You refused. You told me that a life without a soul was a life not worth living. I respected your choice, and I watched you die in my arms. I swear to you, Audrey, by the ashes of every empire I have outlived, I do not want your blood. I want your life. I want you to live. He stood up, pulling a heavy black obsidian dagger from his desk drawer and slipping it into his coat pocket. We have exactly 40 minutes before Mercer's research team begins the cellular extraction on your brother, Caspar said, his face hardening into the mask of a ruthless warlord. I am going to get him back, but to get past Vanguard's security perimeter, I need you with me. Your genetic signature is the only thing that bypasses the biometric locks on Mercer's vaults. Will you come with me, Audrey? Audrey looked down at the gold coin still resting on the desk, then out at the dark New York skyline. The life she knew, the coffee shop, the minimum wage shifts, the crushing debt was gone. It had been an illusion. Let's go get my brother, Audrey said, her voice steadying as an ancient dormant strength flared to life within her chest. Caspar nodded, his eyes flashing brilliant gold. Hold on to me. Before she could process his words, he swept her into his arms. The elevator doors didn't slide open. Instead, Caspar kicked through the reinforced glass of the emergency exit window behind his desk. Audrey let out a scream as they plummeted out of the 55th floor, down into the roaring, rainy darkness of Manhattan. The freezing rain felt like needles against Audrey's skin as they plummeted through the dark, chaotic sky of Manhattan. She tried to scream, but the velocity stole the breath directly from her lungs. Below them, the amber and crimson lights of Park Avenue blurred into a river of neon rushing up to meet them at a terrifying speed. Just as her mind braced for the inevitable bone-crushing impact against the pavement, Caspar twisted his body in mid-air. He didn't fall. He navigated the descent with the terrifying predatory grace of a hawk diving for prey. With a concussive thud that buckled the reinforced steel beneath them, they landed on the flat roof of a neighboring lower-tier skyscraper. The impact should have shattered every bone in Audrey's body, but Caspar had absorbed the entirety of the kinetic force. He stood up slowly, the rain rolling off his pristine obsidian black suit, holding her effortlessly against his chest. Breathe, Audrey, Caspar commanded, his voice a low, steady rumble that vibrated against her ear. You are safe. I have you, she gasped, her lungs expanding violently as the shock receded just enough for her survival instincts to kick in. She scrambled out of his arms, stumbling backward on the slick, tar-covered roof. Her cheap denim jacket was soaked through, clinging to her freezing skin. How did you do that? She stammered, her voice barely audible over the roaring wind. We just fell 40 stories. We should be dead. You really are a monster. I am a survivor, Caspar corrected, his glowing amber eyes cutting through the darkness. A deep, mechanical thrumming suddenly eclipsed the sound of the storm. From the low-hanging, turbulent clouds above them, a massive, matte black helicopter descended. It had no registration numbers, no navigational lights, and its rotors spun with a whisper. Quiet, heavily modified acoustic dampening system. It hovered inches above the roof, the side door sliding open to reveal a heavily armed tactical pilot. Mr. Laurent, the pilot shouted over the downdraft, his face hidden behind a polarized visor. Vanguard drones are scrambling from the Mercer compound. We have a 30-minute window before they establish localized air superiority over the Hudson Valley. Get in, Caspar said, turning to Audrey and offering his pale, icy hand. If Garrick Mercer's surgeons begin the extraction process on your brother, they will drain his bone marrow to synthesize the enzyme. He will not survive the night. Your only choice is to trust me. Audrey looked at his outstretched hand, then at the menacing helicopter. She thought of Leo. She thought of his pale, sickly face in the hospital bed, the way he had smiled at her just that morning, completely unaware that he was a pawn in an ancient, blood-soaked war. Setting her jaw, she ignored Caspar's hand and climbed into the cabin of the helicopter on her own. The interior of the aircraft was stripped down to the bare essentials, reinforced seating, tactical screens displaying encrypted satellite feeds, and racks of matte black weaponry. Casper sat across from her, his posture impossibly rigid, his eyes locked onto a digital map of the Hudson Valley. "Tell me about this bloodline," Audrey demanded, shivering violently, as the helicopter banked sharply north, leaving the glittering skyline of New York behind. "You said I am the prima anima. You said my blood gives you daylight immunity. Why does Garrick Mercer want it so badly? What is he planning to do with my brother?" Casper's jaw tightened. For millennia, our kind has been bound by the sun. It is a biological curse, an allergic reaction at the cellular level that incinerates our flesh. The Sovereign Assembly, led by Mercer, has spent the last century trying to genetically engineer a cure. They view humanity as livestock, Audrey. They hide in the shadows, controlling pharmaceutical markets and global banks, merely to keep the cattle docile. But if Mercer achieves daylight immunity, the masquerade ends. They will no longer need to hide. They will subjugate the human race openly. And the key to that immunity lies in the exact genetic sequence of the first bride. The first bride. Audrey repeated the words, tasting like ash in her mouth. "Amalia, the girl you let die in Amsterdam." Casper flinched, a flash of profound agony crossing his aristocratic features. "I did not let her die. I respected her humanity. I loved her enough to let her go rather than damn her to an eternity of bloodlust and darkness. But Mercer does not share my sentimentality." When he realized that the first bride's soul reincarnates every 5 centuries, carrying the latent genetic markers of the prima anima, he began a global manhunt. "Your brother Leo shares a partial fraction of your DNA. It is not enough to grant full immunity, but it is enough for Mercer's scientists to tear him apart, trying to reverse engineer it." Audrey swallowed hard, her terror solidifying into a cold, hardened resolve. "Then we burn his laboratory to the ground." The helicopter descended rapidly, diving into the heavily forested, mountainous terrain of the Hudson Valley. Through the rain-streaked window, Audrey saw a sprawling complex of brutalist concrete structures cleverly disguised beneath a massive network of industrial, agricultural greenhouses. Bright halogen floodlights pierced the storm, sweeping across the high-voltage perimeter fences. "Donovan," Casper said to the pilot, not taking his eyes off the compound, "put us down on the western ridge. Maintain a holding pattern. When the asset is secured, I will signal for extraction." "Understood, sir," Donovan replied. The helicopter didn't even land. It hovered 10 feet above the rocky, mud-slicked ridge. Casper unbuckled his harness, stepped to the open door, and looked back at Audrey. "Stay close to me. Do not look away, and do not hesitate." He grabbed her waist, and they dropped into the darkness. They landed silently in the thick mud concealed by a dense cluster of ancient pine trees. Below them, the rear entrance of the facility was guarded by 4 Vanguard mercenaries in heavy tactical gear, armed with suppressed automatic rifles. "The biometric locks on the reinforced doors run on a localized blood magic algorithm," Casper whispered, his breath invisible in the freezing air. Mercer tied the security grid to the prima anima's genetic signature, ensuring that only you or someone carrying your blood could open the inner vaults. "I will clear the perimeter. You place your hand on the scanner." Before Audrey could nod, Casper vanished. It wasn't a run. It was a localized blur of kinetic violence. In the span of 3 seconds, the 4 heavily armed mercenaries were dead. Casper didn't use a weapon. He moved through them like a dark wind, his bare hands snapping necks and crushing tactical helmets with a sickening crunch. He dropped the last guard to the concrete, his amber eyes glowing with a terrifying, untamed ferocity, his fangs fully descended. Audrey felt her stomach heave, but she forced herself to run down the muddy embankment, stepping over the crumpled bodies of the mercenaries. She approached the massive, blast-proof steel door. Next to it was a sleek black glass panel emitting a faint red light. "Place your palm on the glass," Casper instructed, his voice thick and distorted, struggling to suppress his predatory instincts. Audrey pressed her freezing, shaking hand against the panel. A micro-needle instantly shot out from the glass, pricking the center of her palm. She gasped, pulling her hand back as a single drop of her blood smeared across the scanner. The machine hummed. The red light shifted to a brilliant glowing green. Heavy hydraulic locks disengaged with a deafening clank, and the massive steel doors slowly hissed open, revealing a blindingly bright, sterile white corridor. "We are in," Casper said, his fangs retracting as he wiped a smear of blood from his tailored cuff. "Stay behind me." The interior of the facility was a nightmare disguised as a cutting-edge medical research center. The walls were lined with polished steel and immaculate white ceramic tiles, but the air smelled heavily of metallic ozone, industrial bleach, and the unmistakable coppery stench of raw blood. Audrey followed Casper closely, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. They moved silently through a labyrinth of empty corridors, bypassing automated security turrets that Casper dismantled with terrifying, blinding speed. He ripped the heavy surveillance cameras from the ceilings before their lenses could even pivot to track their movement, plunging the hallways into localized blind spots. "Where is he?" Audrey whispered, her voice trembling. "Where is Leo?" "Lower levels," Casper replied, pausing at a heavy intersection to listen. His inhuman hearing picked up the faint rhythmic pulse of machinery and the distant agonizing moans of test subjects. "They are holding the mortals in the subterranean cryogenic wards. Follow me." They reached a set of reinforced double doors marked Project Anima Restricted Access. Casper didn't bother looking for a scanner. He simply raised his boot and kicked the doors with the force of a freight train. The heavy steel buckled and tore off its hinges, crashing into the laboratory beyond. Audrey rushed in, and the breath immediately left her lungs. The laboratory was cavernous. Along the walls were dozens of massive cylindrical glass tanks, filled with a viscous, translucent fluid. Inside the tanks floated human beings, some men, some women, all unconscious, and connected to a horrific array of intravenous tubes that continuously cycled a dark, purplish blood into their veins. But Audrey's eyes locked onto the center of the room, restrained to a tilted stainless steel surgical table beneath a battery of surgical lights, was Leo. He was pale, his lips tinged blue, and a thick central venous catheter had been violently inserted into his chest, pumping his blood out into a complex centrifugal centrifuge. "Leo!" Audrey screamed, sprinting across the sterile floor, ignoring the scientists in hazard suits who were scrambling away in terror. She reached the table, her hands desperately pulling at the heavy leather straps binding her brother's wrists. Leo groaned, his eyelids fluttering, but he was heavily sedated. "Audrey," he mumbled, his voice incredibly weak. "Why is it so cold? I've got you, Leo. I'm going to get you out of here," she sobbed, struggling to break the thick leather restraints. "How touching," a voice echoed through the massive laboratory. It was smooth, cultured, and dripping with malicious amusement. "The first bride returns to the slaughterhouse directly into my waiting arms." Audrey spun around. Standing on a raised observation balcony overlooking the laboratory was Garrick Mercer. He didn't look like an ancient, bloodthirsty warlord. He looked like a European aristocrat from a bygone era, dressed in a bespoke, immaculate white suit that contrasted sharply with his slicked-back silver hair. His eyes were not amber like Casper's, but a terrifying, bottomless crimson. Flanking him were a dozen elite vanguard mercenaries, their weapons trained directly on Audrey and Casper. Casper stepped between Audrey and the balcony, his posture radiating lethal intent. "Let the boy go, Garrick. Your dispute is with me. He is a mortal. He has no place in our war." Garrick laughed, a dry, rasping sound that sent shivers down Audrey's spine. "No place in our war, Casper, old friend. You have grown incredibly naive in your old age. The boy's blood is useless. We ran the sequencing the moment my men extracted him from the hospital. He only possesses 50% of the required genetic markers. He cannot synthesize daylight immunity." "Then let him go," Audrey screamed, tears of rage blurring her vision. "I cannot do that, my dear," Garrick said, a cruel smile twisting his lips. "Because while his blood cannot cure us, his suffering serves a much higher purpose. It brought you here. I knew Casper was protecting you, hiding you in the squalor of Brooklyn, masking your scent with the mundane filth of mortal life. I needed a bait strong enough to draw you out into the open." Garrick descended the metal staircase slowly, his crimson eyes locked onto Audrey. "You see, Audrey Casper hasn't told you the full truth about the prima anima. He told you that your blood cures the sun, but did he tell you how the cure is administered?" Audrey froze, looking at Casper. The Vampire King's jaw was clenched so tightly, it looked as though his teeth might shatter. "Do not listen to him, Audrey," Casper growled. To synthesize the immunity, Garrick continued, stopping 10 feet away from them. One does not merely drink the blood of the first bride. One must drain her completely, every drop. Her heart must stop beating in the jaws of the sire. To walk in the sun, Audrey the vampire must consume your soul. That is why Amalia died in 1526. Caspar didn't let her go to respect her humanity. He drained her because he was starving, and the guilt has haunted him for 5 centuries. "Liar!" Caspar roared, his composure finally breaking. He lunged forward with explosive speed, crossing the distance in a fraction of a second. But Garrick was just as ancient, just as fast. The two immortal warlords collided with a deafening shockwave that shattered the glass tanks nearest to them, sending amniotic fluid and unconscious bodies spilling across the tiles. Audrey stood paralyzed, horror washing over her. She looked at the blood on her palm, then at the two monsters tearing each other apart. The man who had promised to protect her. Had he murdered her past self? Was she nothing but a walking blood bag to him? "Audrey, help me!" Leo coughed, his chest spasming as the centrifuge continued to drain his blood. The sound of her brother's voice snapped her out of her shock. She didn't care about the vampires. She didn't care about 500-year-old vendettas or daylight immunity. She grabbed a heavy steel surgical tray from a nearby cart and smashed it repeatedly against the glass housing of the centrifuge. The glass cracked, then shattered, spraying Leo's blood across the floor. "Stop the machine!" Audrey yelled at a cowering technician hiding beneath a terminal. When he didn't move, she grabbed him by the collar of his hazard suit. "Turn it off, or I will let those monsters rip your throat out." The terrified technician scrambled to the console, frantically typing in the override codes. The loud hum of the centrifuge died down, and the agonizing suction on Leo's chest ceased. Audrey grabbed a pair of surgical shears and sliced through the thick leather straps binding her brother, pulling him upright. Across the room, the battle raged. Caspar and Garrick were a blur of unimaginable violence, smashing through concrete pillars and scientific equipment. The elite vanguard mercenaries opened fire, a hail of armor-piercing bullets tearing through the laboratory. Caspar ignored the bullets, ripping into his flesh. He caught one of the mercenaries by the tactical vest and hurled him directly into Garrick, pinning the silver-haired vampire against the far wall. "Audrey, run!" Caspar shouted, his obsidian suit torn to shreds, his pale skin covered in dark, viscous blood. He turned, his glowing amber eyes locking with hers across the chaotic laboratory. In that split second, she didn't see a murderer. She saw the same desperate, agonizing grief she had seen in his eyes at the coffee shop. "I'm not leaving without you," Audrey whispered to herself, the dormant, ancient power of the prima anima suddenly flaring to life within her veins. It was an instinct older than memory. She realized what Garrick had said was a manipulation, a half-truth designed to break her trust. She picked up the shattered, blood-soaked glass of the centrifuge. Her genetic signature controlled the facility. If her blood opened the doors, her blood could shut the entire system down. "Caspar, get back!" Audrey screamed over the gunfire. Without hesitation, she slammed her bleeding palm against the laboratory's central mainframe terminal, smearing her blood across the biometric override port. The entire facility instantly plunged into pitch-black darkness. The backup generators screamed in protest as the localized blood magic algorithm locked down every automated defense system in the complex, turning the laboratory into an impenetrable vault. In the sudden silence, only the terrifying sound of Caspar's fangs sinking into flesh echoed through the dark. The darkness inside the laboratory was absolute, thick and suffocating. The sudden, violent severing of the facility's primary power grid had killed the ambient hum of the servers, plunging the subterranean chamber into an eerie, echoing tomb. The only sounds remaining were the ragged, wet gasps of the surviving vanguard mercenaries, the drip of amniotic fluid from the shattered holding tanks, and the terrifying, bone-crunching impacts of two immortal apex predators tearing each other apart in the pitch black. Audrey crouched on the floor, her arms wrapped tightly around Leo's shivering form. Her brother was semi-conscious, his skin dangerously cold to the touch. The pungent smell of industrial bleach and raw, oxidized blood filled her nostrils. She pressed her hand over Leo's mouth, terrified that a single sound from him would draw the attention of the silver-haired monster, Garrick Mercer. A heavy, sickening thud echoed through the dark, followed by a wet, tearing sound, and a high-pitched, inhuman shriek that vibrated against Audrey's teeth. The sound of a heavy body crashing against a stainless steel operating table followed, and then a profound, chilling silence descended over the laboratory. "Caspar," Audrey whispered, her voice trembling in the void. A soft, golden luminescence pierced the darkness. It was Casper's eyes, glowing with a terrifying, untamed intensity. He stepped out of the shadows, his breathing heavy but controlled. His bespoke obsidian suit was in ribbons, exposing pale, flawless skin that was currently rapidly stitching together across a massive, jagged laceration on his chest. In his right hand, he held a heavy titanium structural support beam ripped straight from the facility's architecture. "Garrick is incapacitated, but he is not dead," Casper said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. "The lockdown you initiated triggered the heavy blast doors. He is pinned beneath the wreckage of the centrifuge, but his regenerative capabilities will free him within the hour. We must leave, now. The doors are locked," Audrey said, helping Leo to his feet. "My blood shut the entire system down. I don't know how to reverse it." "You do not need to reverse it. You only need to command it," Casper replied, moving to her side and effortlessly lifting Leo into his arms. "The biometric grid runs on the prima anima. The building recognizes you as its absolute sovereign. Place your hand on the emergency manual override wheel by the blast doors." Audrey guided them through the wreckage, using the faint glow of Casper's eyes to navigate the treacherous floor. When they reached the massive steel exit door, she found the heavy iron wheel. The moment her blood-stained palm touched the cold metal, the mechanical locking mechanisms deep within the walls groaned in submission. With a screech of grinding gears, the heavy blast door slid open, just enough for them to slip through. They rushed up the concrete stairwell, the emergency red lighting casting long demonic shadows against the walls. The storm outside had intensified the freezing rain, lashing against the brutalist concrete of the Mercer compound. Above them, the deep rhythmic thrumming of a Sikorsky UH-60 Black Hawk helicopter cut through the howling wind. Donovan had maintained his holding pattern perfectly. The massive, matte black aircraft descended rapidly, hovering over the muddy ridge where they had first breached the perimeter. Casper leapt across the muddy embankment, carrying Leo, as if the young man weighed absolutely nothing, and practically threw them both into the open side door of the helicopter. Audrey scrambled in right behind them, collapsing onto the reinforced tactical flooring, as Donovan pulled the collective pitch lever, banking the aircraft sharply to the south to evade the localized anti-air radar. "Get us over the Tappan Zee Bridge and scramble the thermal cloaking," Casper ordered, buckling Leo into a medical bay seat and immediately ripping open a trauma kit. "He has lost roughly 3 pints of blood. I need an intravenous line of lactated Ringer's solution established immediately." As Donovan executed the maneuver, plunging the helicopter into the low-hanging cloud cover, Audrey leaned against the vibrating fuselage, her chest heaving. She looked at Casper. He was covered in blood, his hands moving with surgical precision as he inserted the IV needle into Leo's pale arm. He looked like a monster, yet his touch was incredibly gentle. "What Garrick said," Audrey began, her voice barely audible over the roar of the rotors. "About Amalia, about 1526. Did you kill her?" Casper stopped. His hands froze over Leo's arm. He slowly turned his head, his glowing amber eyes locking onto hers. The fierce, predatory mask he had worn during the battle melted away, revealing a soul that carried 5 centuries of agonizing, solitary grief. "I have killed King's Audrey," Casper whispered, the absolute sincerity in his voice cutting through the mechanical noise of the cabin. "I have slaughtered armies to protect the masquerade of our kind, but I have never harmed the soul that completes my own." He reached into his ruined coat and pulled out the solid gold Dutch ducat, the very coin that had started this nightmare. He pressed it into her hand, his icy fingers wrapping around hers. "In 1526, the plague swept through Amsterdam," Casper said, his voice thick with a pain that time had not dulled. "Amalia was infected. She was dying. The Sovereign Assembly, led by Garrick, discovered her genetic signature. They besieged the city to take her. I begged her to drink my blood, to let me turn her, because it was the only way she could survive the plague and the Assembly. But she refused. She said she would rather die a human than live as a parasite." Audrey looked down at the coin, feeling the heavy, undeniable truth in his words. "Garrick's men set fire to her father's printing house." Casper continued, a tear of pure crimson blood tracking down his pale cheek. "I fought through 50 of his elite guard, but I was too late. I pulled her from the flames, but her lungs were already destroyed by the smoke and the plague. She died in my arms. Garrick tells the Assembly I drained her to consolidate my power, to hide his own failure. But I swear to you, Audrey, my heart died with her that night. I only kept breathing so I could find you again. Audrey stared into his eyes, the phantom memories flaring in her mind, the smell of the burning printing press, the suffocating smoke, the agonizing heat, and the cold, desperate embrace of the man holding her. "I believe you," Audrey whispered, leaning forward and resting her forehead against his blood-stained chest. For the first time in 500 years, Casper Laurent let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding, wrapping his arms around her as the helicopter disappeared into the storm. The helicopter touched down 2 hours later on the sprawling manicured lawns of Ochre Court, a massive Gilded Age mansion situated on the cliffs of Newport, Rhode Island. The estate, masquerading as a privately funded historical preservation site, was actually the heavily fortified Northeastern Command Center for Laurent Capital Group. The ocean waves crashed violently against the jagged rocks of the cliff walk below the salt spray, mingling with the relentless autumn rain. A team of discreet, highly trained medical professionals, led by a stern-faced mortal named Dr. Henrik Bauer, was waiting on the tarmac. They rushed Leo onto a gurney, rushing him toward the mansion's state-of-the-art subterranean infirmary. Audrey tried to follow, but exhaustion finally overpowered her adrenaline. Her knees buckled beneath her. Casper caught her before she hit the wet grass. He lifted her effortlessly, carrying her through the massive mahogany doors of the estate, past priceless Renaissance tapestries and heavily armed security personnel who bowed their heads in absolute reverence to their king. When Audrey finally awoke, she was lying in a massive four-poster bed in a room that looked like it belonged in the Palace of Versailles. A fire roared in the grand marble fireplace, casting a warm golden light across the silk sheets. She was wearing a clean, soft cashmere sweater and linen pants, her cheap, blood-stained uniform entirely gone. "Your brother is stable," Casper's voice came from the shadows near the bay window. He was standing, looking out at the turbulent Atlantic Ocean. He had bathed and changed into a simple, dark charcoal sweater and slacks, looking less like a warlord and more like the haunted, solitary billionaire she had met in the coffee shop. "Dr. Bauer has synthesized a localized marrow stimulant that is reversing the damage caused by Garrick's centrifuge. Leo will make a full recovery." Audrey let out a long, shuddering sigh of relief. "Thank you for saving him, for saving me." Casper turned to face her, his amber eyes completely devoid of their predatory glow. "You saved yourself, Audrey. The prima anima is awake within you. The power you commanded to lock down the facility was merely a fraction of what your bloodline is capable of." Audrey sat up, pulling the heavy silk duvet around her. "So what happens now? Garrick is alive. The Sovereign Assembly knows I'm back. You said they control global satellite surveillance and facial recognition grids. I can't go back to Brooklyn. I can't go back to the Hungry Ghost coffee shop. My life is over." "Your life as a mortal pawn is over," Casper corrected, walking slowly toward the edge of the bed. "But you will not live in fear. I have spent 5 centuries building an empire of wealth, political influence, and private military strength precisely for this moment. I will burn the world to ash before I let Garrick Mercer touch you again. However, there is a complication." Audrey tensed. "What complication?" "The Sovereign Assembly possesses ancient tracking methodologies," Casper explained, sitting on the edge of the mattress. "They can trace the unique occult resonance of the prima anima. As long as your genetic signature remains unshielded, they will eventually locate you, whether you are in Newport, Rhode Island, or a bunker beneath the Swiss Alps." "How do we shield it?" Audrey asked, her voice steady. The events of the night had hardened her. She was no longer a terrified barista drowning in medical debt. She was the reincarnation of a queen, and she was ready to fight. Casper looked down at his hands, his aristocratic features heavy with hesitation. "There is an ancient rite, the blood-bound pact. It was forbidden by the Assembly centuries ago because it transfers a portion of a vampire's immortality to a mortal, permanently altering their biological signature without turning them into a creature of the night." Audrey tilted her head. "You mean we share blood?" "More than that," Casper said, looking up, his eyes filled with a terrifying, agonizing vulnerability. "It binds our souls perfectly. It weaves my darkness into your light. The Assembly will no longer be able to track the prima anima because it will be eclipsed by my own ancient sovereign signature. You will retain your humanity, your soul, and your ability to walk in the sun, but you will be forever tethered to me. You will feel my pain, my hunger, my emotions, and you will stop aging. It is a permanent, irrevocable marriage of blood. Audrey absorbed the magnitude of his words. He was offering her immortality, a shield against the monsters that hunted her, and an eternity by his side. But he was also offering her the one thing she had never had: profound, unwavering safety. "Why do you look so terrified to ask me?" Audrey asked softly, reaching out to touch his cold marble-like hand. "Because I promised I would never force this life upon you." Casper whispered, a raw, desperate ache in his voice. "I waited 500 years for you to return to me. The thought of losing you again tears my sanity to pieces. But I will not trap you in a gilded cage. If you refuse the pact, I will spend every resource I possess, every drop of blood in my veins, to hide you and your brother until you die a natural human death. The choice is entirely yours, Audrey." Audrey looked at the man before her. She remembered the static electricity that had sparked between them at the coffee shop. She remembered the phantom memories of a burning printing press in Amsterdam. She remembered the way he had looked at her in the laboratory, willing to die just to give her a chance to run. She didn't want a normal human death, not anymore. "Do it," Audrey said, her voice resolute, her eyes locking onto his. Casper's breath hitched. "Are you absolutely certain?" "I've been waiting for you too," Audrey whispered, realizing the absolute truth of her own words. "I just didn't know it until you walked through that door in Brooklyn. Bind us, Casper." Casper's eyes flared with a brilliant, overwhelming gold. He moved with a sudden, fluid grace, kneeling on the bed beside her. He reached into his pocket and produced the obsidian dagger he had taken from his Park Avenue office. Without a word of hesitation, he sliced the blade across his own palm, his dark, powerful blood welling to the surface. He handed the dagger to Audrey. Her hands didn't shake. She took the smooth, heavy glass handle and drew the razor-sharp edge across her own palm, wincing slightly at the sharp sting. "By the ashes of the old world and the blood of the new," Casper chanted softly, his voice dropping into a resonant, ancient language that vibrated in Audrey's chest. He reached forward, pressing his bleeding palm directly against hers. The moment their blood mixed, a literal shockwave of pure, blinding energy exploded through the room. It wasn't just a spark of static electricity. It was a physical force that shattered the glass of the bay windows and extinguished the fire in the hearth. Audrey gasped, her back arching as a rush of unimaginable heat and power flooded her veins. It wasn't painful, it was euphoric. She felt Casper's ancient soul intertwine with hers. She felt his centuries of loneliness, his immense, staggering power, and his overwhelming, consuming love for her. Their fingers intertwined, sealing the pact. Casper leaned forward, his glowing eyes locked onto hers, and for the first time in 500 years he kissed his bride. It was a kiss that tasted of blood, of rain, and of an eternity finally reclaimed. Far beneath them, in the subterranean infirmary, the monitors tracking Leo's vital signs beeped steadily, and miles away in the wreckage of the Hudson Valley compound, a bloody, battered Garrick Mercer pulled himself from the rubble, staring at the sky, as the unique tracking resonance of the prima anima vanished completely from the global grid. The game had changed. The Vampire King had finally crowned his queen, and the real war was only just beginning. The blood-bound pact had changed everything yet. As the first grey light of dawn crept over the Atlantic, Audrey found that the world looked remarkably the same. The difference was not in her vision, but in her perception. She could hear the rhythmic deep-sea currents hitting the cliffs 300 feet below. She could feel the faint, lingering hum of the mansion's security grid, as if it were a nervous system extension of her own. Most of all, she felt Casper. He was no longer just a person in the room. He was a constant, steady anchor in her own heartbeat. "You are adjusting well," Casper said, his voice coming from the shadows of the study, where he had been reviewing encrypted intelligence reports since dawn. He moved toward her, his presence now feeling like a warm, protective shroud. "I can feel them," Audrey whispered, looking at her hands, which no longer felt fragile. "The assembly, they're confused. The signal is gone." "They are not just confused, they are panicked," Casper replied, a cold, calculating edge to his voice. "Garrick Mercer is currently mobilizing the entirety of his vanguard assets to scour the North Atlantic. He knows the pact was performed, but he does not know where we are. The pact cloaks you from electronic detection, but it does not hide us from the eyes of the other elders." "We can't keep running," Audrey said, stepping closer to him. "If he's desperate enough to launch a full-scale tactical search, He will eventually find the estate. We need to stop reacting and start taking control. Casper smiled, a rare, genuine expression that transformed his sharp features. That is why you are the queen, not the captive. I have spent centuries playing by the rules of the old masquerade. Garrick expects me to hide, to defend, to protect. He does not expect me to bring the war to his doorstep. What do you have in mind? Audrey asked. The Sovereign Assembly holds their annual Ascension Gala in 3 days, Casper said, pulling up a digital interface on a sleek minimalist desk. It is a global gathering of the most influential vampires, CEOs, and political power brokers who are secretly beholden to our kind. It is hosted in a private high-security fortress in the Swiss Alps. Garrick will be there, assuming he is untouchable. He intends to present his research on your brother, or rather, the failed research to justify his continued unauthorized harvesting of human subjects. He is losing his standing with the other elders. We go to the gala, Audrey realized, her blood beginning to sing with an anticipatory heat. We go as guests, Casper corrected, his eyes flashing amber. We will walk into the heart of their power. We will not be hiding. We will be revealing our union to the entire council. When they see the pact, they will be forced to acknowledge you. And when Garrick tries to strike, we will dismantle his credibility and his life in front of the only people he cares to impress. The preparations began immediately. The Laurent estate became a hive of activity. Audrey was fitted in a gown of midnight blue that felt like liquid silk, designed with hidden tactical weave fibers that could stop a high-caliber round. She learned the etiquette of the ancient houses, the subtle nods and gestures that signaled status among the immortal elite. She was no longer the girl scraping by on minimum wage. She was the architect of her own destiny. The Alps were cold, the air thin and biting, but Audrey didn't feel it. She stepped out of the private Laurent jet onto the tarmac of a hidden snow-covered airfield in Switzerland, her arm linked with Casper's. He looked magnificent in a white tie tuxedo, his presence radiating an ancient, undeniable authority that made the security guards at the perimeter instinctively bow as they passed. The fortress, a sprawling complex of reinforced stone and glass carved into the side of the Matterhorn, was glowing with a harsh, artificial light. As they walked through the grand entrance, the music, a haunting, centuries-old symphony, died down. Hundreds of guests, all possessing the same stillness, the same predatory grace, turned to look. Garrick Mercer stood at the head of the banquet hall, a glass of deep red liquid in his hand. His face was still bruised, the regenerative process not yet fully complete, and his crimson eyes flared with a mixture of hatred and profound shock as he saw them enter. "Casper," Garrick said, his voice echoing through the silent hall, "you have a lot of nerve appearing here after the mess you made in the Hudson Valley. I am not here to discuss the past." "Garrick," Casper said, his voice ringing with a calm, resonant power that silenced the room. He turned to the assembled elders. "I am here to announce a change in the hierarchy. This is Audrey Reynolds, the prima anima." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some gasped, others drew back in fear. "She is a thrall," Garrick spat, stepping down from the dais, his hands balling into fists. "She is a parasite, a mortal who has tricked a weak-willed king. She is my wife," Casper announced, his voice vibrating with a finality that shook the chandeliers. "We are bound by the blood pact. Her sovereignty is mine. Any attempt to touch her or her kin is an act of war against the Laurent bloodline." Garrick laughed, a shrill, hysterical sound. "The pact, you fool, the council, will never accept a human queen. Kill them both." The vanguard mercenaries in the back of the room reached for their weapons, but they never got the chance. Audrey didn't use a weapon. She didn't use her hands. She simply willed the air in the room to change. She channeled the deep, ancient power of the prima anima that she had felt the moment she locked down the facility. The security grid of the fortress, which was tied to the same ancient blood magic systems as the lab, instantly recognized her. The weaponized security turrets previously hidden in the ceiling pivoted toward Garrick and his men. "Garrick Mercer," Audrey said, her voice amplified by the architecture of the room, sounding like a goddess delivering judgment. "You have broken the fundamental laws of our kind. You have operated in the light, you have endangered the masquerade, and you have failed the council." The elders, realizing that the system had recognized Audrey, began to murmur among themselves. Garrick's support base crumbled as they realized the facility was now effectively a weapon pointed at their own throats. Kill her! Garrick screamed, lunging for Audrey with a dagger made of white ash. Caspar didn't even flinch. He caught Garrick's wrist mid-air with the speed of a striking viper. With a sickening crack, he shattered the bone, throwing Garrick back against the stone wall. Caspar loomed over him, his fangs fully extended, his amber eyes burning like molten gold. The time for your lies is over, Garrick, Caspar hissed, his voice echoing through the stunned hall. He didn't kill him, that would be too easy. Instead, he signaled to the guards, who were now loyal to the new order. Take him to the deepest vault. He will stay there for the next 500 years. Let him contemplate his failure in the dark. As the guards dragged a screaming Garrick away, the room fell into a heavy, respectful silence. The elders bowed one by one, acknowledging the new queen. Audrey felt a deep, profound sense of peace. The war wasn't over, there would always be rivals, always be politics, but she was no longer a victim. She was the anchor for the most powerful vampire on the planet. She looked at Caspar, who was watching her with an expression of pure, unadulterated awe. He leaned down, his voice a soft whisper in her ear. "You were magnificent, my love. We're just getting started," Audrey replied, looking out over the room of immortals who were now waiting for her command. Outside, the first rays of the morning sun began to hit the peaks of the Swiss Alps, bathing the world in a brilliant golden light. For the first time in 500 years, the king could walk in the sun, and for the first time in her life, the queen was finally home. The journey from a broken barista in Brooklyn to the queen of the shadow world was not a dream, it was a reclamation. Audrey and Caspar have proven that love, when bound by blood, and forged in the fires of ancient secrets, is the most powerful weapon of all. But the world of the Sovereign Assembly is vast, and new threats are already stirring in the darkness. Do you want to see how Audrey and Caspar navigate their new reign? Like, share, and subscribe to stay tuned for the next epic chapter in the saga of the Vampire King and his bride. The war is far from over,